Hi and welcome to this new video, Anne's handmade favourite stitches. I'm going to go through probably about 9 different stitches that I absolutely love using within my Sew for the Soul and also my embroidery templates. So I'm just working on a piece of linen, and the very first stitch that we're going to look at is a boolean knot. These little stitches I think are absolutely gorgeous. They look like little caterpillars. So I'm going to run through the stitches. I am left-handed. I'm sorry I can't do these right-handed, but there are loads of tutorials online for doing right-handed stitching, and I'll try and show you as many close-ups as I can. But for those lefties out there, hopefully this will give you a little bit of a helping hand with some of the stitches. Some of them it's just getting going, and once you get going it's fine. So the boolean knot is one of these ones that you just need to get your head around. Okay, so what you want to do is bring your needle up at the top of the knot that you want to make. I'm using a pearl thread just on some linen, and what you're then going to do is put your needle down at the bottom. So this is the length of the knot that you want to create. Bring the needle back up at the top end, but leave it in your fabric. Take this tail here and wrap it around your needle. And what you're aiming for is the wrapping to be approximately the same. Let's take that down. So I've got the length of my knot here, and then I've got my wrapped round thread. What you're then going to do is just pull that needle through. So I'm pulling the needle here through, and I'm just holding on, not too tight, just holding on to the threads that are coiled round, just to convince them to come off that needle. Just pinch gently and just pull through that thread, and it just gets tighter and tighter. Okay, so I've pulled it through. Then all you want to do, just keep pulling, just get all those little round bits that have been wrapped around your needle all in a line, and then go back down. So if I do that again, come up at the top of your boolean knot, go back down the length that you'd like it to be, and then back up. Get your thread, wrap it around. Once you get going with these, they are a little bit easier to do. So wrap it around 3 or 4 times, or however many times it is. So if you can see there, we've got the distance of the knot, and I've got my little wrap round threads just there. Thumb and finger, just pull that through slowly, gather those together, and then back down the length of your stitch. So those are the long boolean knots. You can do loopy boolean knots as well, and this is one of the techniques that I used in my Sew for the Soul piece that I actually did, where I went around the edges of my piece of work. So what you want to do with these ones is we're not creating a long stitch this time. So I'm coming just a little bit beyond my stitch and then back up. So it's just like we've done before, but you're not creating a long stitch. So if you can see that I've just gone in tiny bit, probably about 2 mil. So what I'm going to do this time is wrap it around as if I'm doing a long stitch. So I'm putting a lot more threads on here. Just keep going round. The more that you put on, the loopier your knot will be. Okay, so if I just show you there, you've got the tiny stitch and then all the threads here. Exactly the same thing. Just hold with your thumb and finger, pull it through slowly. Now what you want to do this time is you're going to now go back down nearly at the base of that original stitch. Again, just pull it slowly to make sure it doesn't get knotted on itself. And then when you pull that through, you end up with, turn that sideways, a loopy knot. So we'll do that again. So you come up, down nearly next to it, and back up, wrap your thread round, So I'll put a few more on this one. I'll see it a bit loopier. So I've got quite a lot of thread on there, quite a lot of thread on that one this time. Thumb finger, just hold it on, not too tight. If it's not coming off, find if I just wiggle my thumb and finger backwards, you can just pull your needle through. So the needle that you want doesn't want like a really fat eye on it. That just makes your job a lot harder. So there I've got that. I'm going to go back down at the base, pull it slowly, and there you can see you end up, how close can we get? There we go. You end up with either these flat ones here, or you can end up with really loopy ones. So these can build up some absolutely gorgeous textures. So that's your boolean knot. Other knots that I absolutely love, French knots. And again, there's two different ways that you can work with a French knot. So we'll just work our way around our hoop. Bring your thread up and you point your needle away from the hole. Okay, that's the key thing with a French knot, is bring the thread up. So if you're right-handed, you do it the other way. Left-handed, you're going to do it that way. Wrap it around, maybe 4 or 5 times to start off with, and then you're going to go back down where you came up. Okay, you see the little knot there is formed at the bottom of my needle, and just pull it through and you end up with a little knot. So do that again a couple of times. Just untwist that. So pointing, needle away from the hole, wrap it around, 3, 4, 5, and back down where you've just come. Nice tight knot at the bottom. You can really vary this if you're using DMC. I'm just using a pearl, so it's a single strand. So if you're using a DMC thread, single strands, doubles, right the way up to 6 strands can give you some very, very different knots. So these are the tight French knots. So they're all 4 wrapped round. Obviously, if you want really fine detail work, you could just do 2. And you'll end up with a smaller knot. Likewise, you could go, just trying to twist my pearl A thread because it's twisting upon itself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just get that knot at the base of your needle, pull it through, and you end up with chunkier ones. So you can really play around with those. Now they're the tight ones. You can do a loose French knot. So as it says in the title, all you're going to do is wrap it around 1, 2, 3, 4. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to pull on this to create a tight. So I'm going to loosen it. So you can see there now, the thread around here is a lot looser. And then if I slowly pull that through, you end up then with French knots that have little loops on them. So I'll just do that again. 2, oops, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just loosen that off and pull it down. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just loosen it off. So you then get some very different effects. So these ones are the really tight ones here. Just move that across. There we go. Really tight, neat ones, and then you can end up with these really loopy ones as well. So they're really nice again for building up texture. So if you look at this from the side, if you've got like your loopy boolean knots, and then you've got your loopy French knots, and these are just going to start adding some absolutely gorgeous texture. Once you've got your head round a French knot, you can then start playing around with a pistol stitch, which is basically a French knot on a stick. So I might just give myself another piece of embroidery cotton. So I just want to tie off things. I just do a couple of loops around the back and then just go with a knot. So I feel a bit like a Girl Scout today because I've got some threads ready. Right, okay. So pistol stitch. With this one, you're going to come up from the bottom like you would do, exactly the same as a French knot. Point your needle in the direction of your thread, wrap it round, 1, 2, 3, 4, but you're not going to go, oh, helps if the knot in your thread stayed. Try that again. There we go. Right, so in the bottom, there we go. So this, what you would do with a French knot is you do 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'd go back down where your threads come up. But what you're going to do this time is go a little bit further away. Still got the knot, and you can see the knot there at the bottom of my thread. And then when you pull it through, you end up with your knot at the end of a stitch. This is absolutely gorgeous, an absolutely gorgeous stitch. It was one of my friends that told me about this one, and I became a little bit addicted. I have a kit that's a trio of alliums, and it just uses a pistol stitch to create the allium. Okay, so do that again. So bring your stitch up at the bottom, point your needle away from the hole, wrap it round, and then go down to create your stitch. Now again, like you did with the French knots, these have all got tight knots on the end. So if you were doing something, you wanted to build up some texture, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, loosen that thread off. It's a little bit looser, and you'll start getting bigger knots and loopier knots on the end of your pistol stitch. So just loosen that off, and you can really start playing around. So you can see with these stitches and the combination of them how you can really start building up some texture with those 3 stitches. Okay, next stitch is a seed stitch. So this one I use to fill shapes if I need, just to add a little bit of texture, and basically it is a straight stitch. It's called a seeding stitch because it does look like a little seed, and all you do is you have them going in lots of different directions. You can have big ones, little ones, and what I tend to do when I'm doing this, because it's meant to be random, is I do turn my piece of work round as I am working, because I found just by doing that you're a little bit more likely to create that random effect that you are after. This is really good if I have some either shapes or a very plain piece of fabric that hasn't got really any detail on it or any texture or anything like that, and I just want it always looks like it needs filling in with something, but you're never 100% sure what it is. And sometimes just doing a seeding stitch inside can make all the difference. It doesn't have to be a massive area. If you do go for big areas, which I have done in some of my work, it takes a lot of time, and it does send you a little bit doolally. So hopefully you can just see this building up. Lots and lots of different directions. So that's the seed stitch, but it's a really, really nice one to do. A little bit of a variation, just continuing with this idea of these tiny, tiny little stitches, are just to create, they're like little stars. So there's a bit more order to these, and you sort of work your way around. Oops. In a circle. So it's like there's a tiny little circle in the middle, and you just create these little stars. I love these in the background of pieces of work, but they also work really nicely done on quite a large scale. So if you started off with them really small, and then as you go across a piece of work they slowly get bigger and bigger, and you add more spokes to the little wheels, they can begin to look really, really dramatic. So you've got the seeding stitch here that's a little bit more haphazard, and then you've got it a little bit more organised. So if you started building these up, they would look really, really cute. Okay, so that's those stitches. So the next one we're going to look at is a blanket stitch. So I'm just going to finish this one off here and then just start a bit further on. Blanket stitch is one of those stitches for me that when I'm first doing it, it just takes me a little bit of time just to get my head round what direction I'm going in and where I need to start. So I'm going to start at the top. This is really good for edging shapes, edging pieces of work, etc. So I'm going to start up here. So your blanket stitch, you start at the top of your stitch and you go in the direction that you're going to go in. So I'm left-handed, so I'm going to go right. I'm assuming if you're right-handed, you'd go left. And then you create a stitch. And this thread here goes underneath the needle. Needle comes up and you've created your first blanket. And you basically just carry on. Create a stitch and it goes round. And you can create a really, really nice edge to a piece of work. Now it can go straight, but what you can do is if you start moving your stitching as you're going along, it'll follow a shape. So it could curve in, you could curve it out. So if you hold where you want that bit to go and then just stitch up to it, you'll start creating just really nice edges. You can really vary this by the length of the spokes on the inside, the width of the stitch. So they could be really long, they could be really close together, or they could be teeny tiny. It also depends on the thickness of your thread as to how big these are going to be. So that's your blanket stitch. And just to finish off, just when you get to your last little spoke there, just go down and it holds it in place. But that's a really nice stitch. Like I say, for edging, if I'm doing circular work, working in circles with it is really nice, and possibly having one or two different colours of blanket stitch inside each other can be a really nice way of working. Okay, so this is where we're up to. Got our seed stitch, pistol, French knots, boolean, and a blanket stitch. So the next one we're going to look at is a chain stitch. Now this one, the next couple of stitches, you can either use them singularly on their own, or you can use them linked together, chain stitch, hence the word chain. So with this one, start here, I'm going to make just a chain to start off with. So my thread comes up, the needle, create this loop, the needle's going to go down practically next to where it just came up, and then I'm going to create the length of my chain. That thread comes round, pull it through, not too tight because you still want to keep that loop. There we go. And then just back down, that's the other side, and that just holds that chain down. So that's a single chain. Now they're really nice because what you can do is play around with multiple single ones, so you can get a daisy, lazy daisy. So just create the petals, just work your way around. There we go. Just catch it down. There we go, and just keep rotating. Create your chain, little loop, length of stitch. And again with this one, like with all stitches, you can vary the length, the width, how loopy they are. So you could carry on going all the way around and create a little daisy. So that's really, really cute. And you might even finish it off and have a little French knot or something like that in the middle. But what I do like with the chain stitch, as hence the name, you can chain them together. So if we're going to create, go down that way, a chain, what we're going to do, create your first one. Now what we're not going to do this time is we're not going to finish it off. What we're going to do is go next to that first stitch. So I'm on the inside, I don't know how well you can see that. Okay, so I'm going on the inside, not the outside, the inside of the loop. Okay, create the length of my chain, pop the thread round, pull it through, and then I've got a connected chain. So then I can just carry on. Again, depending on where your needle comes up, this can start meandering. So I can change direction. Oops. There we go. I can change the length. So I can make really little chains, which are quite nice for tiny, tiny shapes. So really, really tiny ones. So these are about 2 mil in length. Just hold that up. So you can go really tiny with them. So they're quite nice, quite big, quite like that, big and getting smaller. Get a little bit of depth to your work. And then you can really play around with this, because you could end up with a chain on the end here and finish that one, but then come back and where there's a join. Let's have a look. There we go. So where you've got a join there, you could add then some individual chains. So coming back down, sort of like little, it could be little leaves. This is the beauty, the thing that I absolutely love about hand stitching. It is just like drawing with a needle and thread. And I won't say I was a technical embroiderer. I am self-taught, and I do sort of make it up as I'm going along, but I don't worry about it being 100% perfect or 100% right. It fits the purpose. I've got that one twisted. Go back through. So I've just got, what's happened there is the loop that I've got just twisted. So if I just undo that, there we go. So you can really play around with that chain stitch and just start making, even just on the blue, you could carry on with that and actually make a whole picture that just sort of looks like a little garden. So you can see the textures now that we're building up with our stitch. So our next one is going to be a fly stitch. Fly stitch, I treat that very much like a chain stitch, so you can have individuals and you can also link them together. So an individual fly stitch just starts off exactly like a chain stitch, but instead of going back down near the hole, you're going to create a Y shape. So you're going to go across, come up, wrap your thread round, and then start off with, you can go down just the other side of that V, just to hold it in shape. So you can start creating these V's. If you were doing a landscape piece of work, these are fantastic just for creating birds in the background. So up and over, and then fix it down. Obviously we can play around with this particular stitch, so you can extend it, actually rather than a V you can go into a Y shape. Okay, and again playing around, it could be a really wide Y shape, it could be slightly off center, go in different directions. So you can just really, really play around with that. The Y could be really small. So just going up and down, really tiny that one. But then have a really long stick at the bottom and turn it around that way. I like using these ones if I'm doing gardens, because you can do things like that, and then in a contrasting colour just do little French knots just in the base of the Y's or the V's, that just really, really adds something else. So then what we can do is a connecting fly stitch. Just knock that one off. You see I was very organised, and I have 3 needles all threaded, and I've gone and run out of thread. I'm just using a number 12 purlay for this. It's just a really nice thread to stitch with because it's a little bit silky and nice and smooth. It goes through your needle and goes through the fabric really, really well. Saying that, can't thread it. The needles that I use, I know quite a few people ask me about what types of needles. I'm never very specific about my needle. I just have a range of needles with different sized eyes, and I just use whichever one's going to fit the purpose. But when I'm doing hand embroidery, I have one where the eyes are not really fat. They are quite a slim eye, mainly because if you're doing knots and things like that, you want the needle to go through. Okay, so we're going to do a connecting fly stitch now. So again, we're just coming up the side. I'm going to create my Y shape. Okay, so here's stitch number 1. So to connect them, what I'm going to do is just create another stitch. So I've come up here at the side, just catch that thread there. I'm going to go down here, and then I'm going to come up at the bottom of the Y shape. Make sure my thread goes underneath. So I create the top of my Y and then pop my stick. Oops. There we go. Just pull that a bit tight. Just loosen it off a little bit. There we go. So we've got our connection. So again, go to the other side, come up here, just at the bottom of the Y, the stick on the Y, and create another one. So again, what we can do, we can change the direction. So if I want to go over towards the left, I just start making those sticks go over to the left, back up, going over to the left. So it's that that's sort of leading me. Again, like we did here at the side, as I'm going through this, I can start then playing around with the size and the shapes of my Ys. So I might decide to do one that's got a really small Y, but with a long stem, going right round the corner. And then I might want one that's a little bit wider, might be a bit lopsided. Just pull that through. There we go. And then you can just really start playing around. Just tying the fabric up again. This really should be like a tambourine when you're working in a hoop. Just it keeps your fabric nice and taut. Then you might come back to a bit more of a regular one. So this could be really nice. I mean, I'm beginning now to go around the edge of my embroidery hoop. Like sometimes I'd use the blanket stitch to go around the edge. This can be really nice, going around the edge as well. Let's tighten that up. Okay. Just makes your life a little bit easier if your fabric's nice and tight. So when you come to the end, you've got a couple of choices on your connected flight stitches. You can either just go back down right at the edge if you don't want a stick, or you could give yourself a bit of a tail. So I'm going to finish mine off right next to it, so it's just got a nice end to that. Okay, so that's your connected fly stitch. The next one we've got is a filling stitch, which is a satin stitch. So with this one, I'd normally have a shape that I'm going to work with. So I'll get myself a pencil and draw myself just a guide just to a shape that I want to work with. Okay, you can't really see that, but I've sort of drawn a bit of a leaf shape. So what I'm going to do, we'll go circle, because I do a lot of circles with everything that I'm doing. Try a different pencil. Normally if I'm working with this, I'd have my fabric pencil, but I'm not that organised. Right, okay, so I've got my circle that's on there. You can just about see that. So we're going to start filling this shape in. Now I never start right at the edge, I always start just a little bit further in just to get my first stitch, and we're going straight across. Okay, and then basically they're just lots of straight stitches just going backwards and forwards. Now if you want to fill it in a little bit quicker, if you were using a DMC thread you could use more strands, and with Perlé I would probably use a double thread, especially with a shape this big. I wasn't thinking about that when I started this, but the basic principles are there. Okay, so I'd take that back. Now if you've got, I can see I've still got some tiny little gaps, because you do want your threads to get as close as possible, so you can end up doing some little filling stitches. This is really, really nice. I've done it quite a bit on some of my embroideries where I've got circles at the bottom, and it's nice to have lots and lots of decorative stitches, but it's also quite nice to have some blocks of colour, because it just gives you another texture to start working with. So I'm just going from side to side, so where I've gone down I'm just coming back up right next to where I went down, and then the same, and you just keep working your way along. Sometimes this can be a bit harder because a linen fabric's quite an open weave. It can be quite hard because it's quite, you can end up coming back up where you just went down like that. It just happens to happen while I was just saying that that could happen. So this works really nicely on quite close weave like cotton fabrics. Oh, there we go. So you just keep working your way across. Now if I'd got quite a few of these on a piece, I would change the direction, so I'd have some vertical, some horizontal, some diagonal, possibly change the thread finishes. So if you have some perlé, and then on one of your next shapes maybe a linen thread or a cotton thread, going from single threads to multiple threads can really add texture to a piece of work. This is going to take me forever to fill in, so I'll just keep going just to the end of my cotton on the thread. So it is just backwards and forwards. If I was doing something this big, and I'd thought about it before I started, I'd have had a double thread on my needle, just because it just makes it that little bit quicker. The only thing you have to be careful of if you do double threads or multiple threads is they can get twisted. Okay, right, I just need to left a gap there, so I'll come back and just do a little filling one. So if you do a filling one, when you come down to this end, make sure it goes in between threads at the other side. So hopefully you can see I'm beginning to fill that shape. So that would be your satin stitch, and you can fill any shape whatsoever. If you look on the back, then you can just see the little stitches just round the edges that I've done. If you had got a really open weave fabric, you can do it, but you end up practically with a satin stitch on both sides, because you can't tend to go back down where you've just come up, because it just keeps on picking itself. So you could go backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards. It just takes a little bit longer and takes a little bit more thread. Okay, so we've just got one more stitch that I want to show you, and that's a stem stitch. And a little bit like the title says, this is really nice for doing stems. It's also nice as well for outlining, because it's another thread that you can use as a bit of a directional thread. So I'm going to have a look at doing it down here. So create yourself your first little straight stitch. Okay, first straight stitch. So we're going to work quite closely with the one that we've just done. So my needle's coming up, it's a little bit further on, and then I'm going to go down halfway down that first stitch. So I've created my first 2 stitches. Then you just carry on with what we've just done. So I come down a little way beyond that first stitch. I'll pull the thread out because then you can see that a little bit beyond, and then my needle's going to go back down. So where that thread there is halfway, I'm going to go the other side and I'm going to go back down, and then I just do the same thing again, a little bit beyond, and then where that stitch was there, just go back down. Now again, you can change the direction. So if I want to move across, just bring this needle up a little bit further across and then go back down. So you can see I'm beginning to change the direction that this is going in. So if I was doing a stem on a plant, I can sort of start making it curve. It can go around a circle. So it's always this, it's the same with most of them, it's that stitch that you do that sort of starts taking you in the direction. So if I want to pull this back round again, just get my stitch. So you're always going beyond, a little bit beyond, and then back down just next to the stitch you've just done. Okay, so that way you're sort of building that up. There is another way that you can do this stitch. So if you've come up, what you can do is go the other way. So go underneath and up. So what you're doing this time is you're doing it the other way around. So your threads come up halfway through. So you then decide where you want that stitch to go, down, and then come back up. Okay, so down and back up, so it's a bit halfway. So that's 2 different ways. I suppose it just depends on how you are holding, whether you want to see it on the top or see it working from the underneath. So this one, if you want to change direction again, you're just going to move your needle across a little bit, come back up where the other one was, and then again move it across and up, across and up. So you can start changing. So this one you can change it going over the top, that one's going the other way around. So it's 2 different ways, but the basic principle is the same, that these stitches are, see how close I can get, they're just slightly overlapping. You can see it quite well on that bit there. I went a bit wrong there because I went going across a bit too quickly. So I'd need to just bring that bit round, but that top bit there and here, you can see as you come round it's quite nice because you can get these feathery edges or these really nice sharp edges on there as well. So that's just a bit of an introduction just to my favourite stitches. So we've got the boolean, the French knot, the pistol stitch, seeding stitch, fly, chain, blanket, stem, and satin stitch. So thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully you'll start using some of these stitches within your work. If you're a lefty, hopefully that's helped a little bit. If you're a righty, hope that's helped. I'm sorry I'm not right-handed and I can't even attempt to have a go at this right-handed, but there's loads of tutorials out there if you are really stuck. And like everybody always says to me, just look at it opposite from somebody, and it's like sitting in a mirror. It really isn't when you're left-handed, sitting just opposite somebody right-handed. It's not that simple. You do sort of have to flip your brain around a little bit, but that's by the by. So happy stitching everybody, and I'll see you soon.